What can I, as a DM, do to give my players more control over their adventure? Freedom of choice is one of the coolest things about D&D, and I try to keep that in mind while writing my adventures. Recently, my players were about to engage in a siege of the city of Suzail. Before that, however, they had just come to know that a neighboring tribe of giants, which so far had no interest in meddling with the affairs of the small folk, could have a solid reason to join arms with the party's allies, a common enemy. A precious artifact to the giant tribe had been stolen years ago, and the party had the means to prove their enemy was responsible for that. The Giants' alliance could tilt the scales in favor of the party's allies as, giants in a siege. Throughout the entire campaign, this giant tribe had been spoken of as stubborn and dangerous. It sounded like a cool quest. Establish delicate diplomatic talks with someone who could have little patience to hear what you have to say. But again, they were stubborn, so there should be real chances the players could fail. And they were also dangerous, so there was a chance the players would rather not risk their necks on that quest. Those two elements put together are a practical example of player agency. They bring freedom of choice, risk of failure, and their associated benefits and consequences. It also creates some branches for the design of the adventure. The connection between encounters in an adventure is commonly referred to as nodes. There's a great post by Justin Alexander about node-based scenario design on his website, which delves into this subject. I'll leave a link in the video description for you. The manner through which those nodes are arranged can lead to different structures: linear adventures, non-linear adventures, and branched adventures. In linear adventures, encounter A leads to encounter B, which leads to encounter C, and so on. Some don't like this structure because they think it leads to railroading. I beg to disagree, as this is only one possible way player agency can manifest. As long as players can develop their own strategy to tackle each encounter and they have the chance of succeeding or failing, they are not being railroaded. Of course, linear adventures deliver less player freedom than other adventures structures, but they are much easier to design and they increase the chances that players will fully use all the work the DM has put into preparing encounters. Its main issue to me is another one. As there are no alternative routes, one encounter failure may lead to failure on the entire adventure goal. Or it may lead to a situation in which neither players nor DM knows what to do, which is even worse. So, if I'm running a linear adventure, I always try to have an answer to this question: what happens if the players fail in one encounter? That usually helps me prevent situations like that. Non-linear adventures are the extreme opposite of that. The adventure hook, or its initial encounter, immediately unlocks all other adventure encounters. In other words, players can freely choose which encounter to face in any order. If players succeed in all or some encounters, they either achieve the adventure goal or unlock the final encounter. That's one way of designing a sandbox adventure. It provides players with the highest degree of freedom and best accommodate failure in individual encounters, as there are alternative routes that players can take to achieve the adventure's final goal. Such adventures have two potential side effects. One, they are more complex to design. After all, the whole adventure has to make sense regardless of the multiple routes available for players to take. It's especially complex if the adventure is heavily inclined towards storytelling, as the story also has to make sense despite those different routes. When designing non-linear adventures, I also put much thought into the number of successful encounters players must achieve to succeed in the entire adventure. That establishes a critical trade-off. Suppose players must succeed in only a few encounters. In that case, it gives players higher freedom and better handles failure in individual encounters, but enhances the design complexity and the amount of unused work. On the other hand, if players must succeed in all encounters, it reduces player freedom and punishes encounter failure. But it reduces the design complexity and ensures that most prep work will be used, as I know that players will probably have to work their way through all encounters. Branched adventures are the middle path. In them, every encounter may unlock one or more encounters. It's really helpful to design an encounter flowchart when designing branched adventures. The simplest branched adventure offers players simply an alternative order of encounters. It helps to think of encounters in layers. A first layer encounter unlocks 2 or more second layer encounters. Players must tackle all second layer encounters to unlock the following third layer encounters, but they can do so in whichever order they want. They provide a bit more player freedom than linear adventures in exchange for a bit more complexity in its design. Branched adventures can also offer the players alternative routes. In that case, a first layer encounter unlocks 2 or more second layer encounters. Players can choose which of the second layer encounters to tackle, and they need to succeed in only one to unlock one or more of the following third layer encounters. Each second layer encounter may unlock the same third layer encounter, different third layer encounters, or a mix of them. For instance, encounter A unlocks encounters B and C in the second layer, but encounter B unlocks encounters D and E, while encounter C unlocks encounters E and F. Such adventures provide greater freedom and alternative routes that players may take if they happen to fail in one of them. But as always, the trade-off is a higher burden for the DM in the form of design complexity and unused work. My Diplomacy with the Giants quest is an example of a branched adventure with alternative routes. The initial encounter allows players to engage in dangerous diplomatic talks with the giants. If they do, they engage in encounter B in the second layer. If they succeed in negotiating with the Giants Alliance, they unlock encounter C in the third layer. If they fail, the only option is to move ahead to the siege without the Giants. I'm calling that encounter D. It's similar to encounter C, except players don't have the Giants' help. Likewise, if players opt not to engage with the Giants, they move directly to the same encounter D. The great benefit of alternative routes like that is providing all that freedom. Players can choose where they want to go, they are rewarded for taking the risk and succeeding, and if they fail in one encounter, there is an alternative route for them to still succeed in the adventure. But which of those adventure structures do I like the most? Well, all of them. What I really try to do is choose which of them better fits what I'm creating. As long as I know those are the tools available in my design toolkit and that I have clear in my mind the trade-offs between player freedom and handling failure on the one hand and design complexity and unused work on the other hand, I can consciously choose which of those structures works best for each situation. So I hope that helps you to organize your toolkit as well.